Okay, so we are starting with circular flow of income. So why are we calling it a circular flow? Because we're calling it a circular flow because if you make a circle like this, so something that is moving like this comes back like this, right? So circular flow is like जब circle बन रहा होता है ये हमारा starting point होता है. So ये जो movement है, it's come back to the original point, right? So it's a so when we're talking about circular flow, what we are saying is that income is moving in a circular motion between all the relevant stakeholders that are present within that circular motion, right? And who are the relevant stakeholders who are present within that circular motion? They're households and firms. और इसको अभी हम देखते हैं. तो पहली चीज तो आप इस बात को समझें कि circular flow of income जो है ना काफी useful way है of structuring the economy as a whole and modeling it. Now, what do you mean by structuring and modeling it? Because if you need to understand how the macroeconomy functions, you need to understand how income is generated in the economy. And remember that, and that model is perfectly explained to the circular flow of income. It basically shows how your national income is generated or how much GDP is generated in the economy. If you understand the circular flow of income, it is going to tell you the the if you understand how income is generated within the economy in a circular motion, you will actually end up calculating your GDP values. It is going to give you a lot of leads on your economic growth taking place, your macroeconomic performance, as well as your how much GDP you have generated as well. So circular, if you understand the national income, if you understand the circular flow of national income, you actually understand how much national income is generated, how much GDP is generated, and your overall performance of the economy. And that will also give you leads on, or it will also help you calculate the value of the GDP. And we'll come to that. How is GDP calculated if we try to understand the circular flow? So basically, if we move forward, first of all, you need to understand that. So basically, the primary conclusions जो तो हम निकाल सकते हैं ना circular flow of income से, that is the level of economic growth. हमें अंदाजा हो जाएगा if we understand the circular flow. We can see how much economic growth is generated, that is how much income is generated and GDP is generated. We'll also measure the GDP or economic growth by looking at the circular flow or taking figures from or within the circular flow. And how is that? देख लेते हैं. So first of all, you need to understand that अगर हम इस household हम एक तरफ ले रहे हैं households, right, and we're taking firms. So इसमें क्या हो रहा है? सबसे पहले ये हो रहा है कि households जो है ना, they are basically providing the four factors of production in the form of land, labor, capital, and enterprise to firms. So what do you mean by that? Basically, households are providing. अगर आप इस लाइन को देखें, households जो है, they are providing the factors of production to firms. Firms को they are providing factors of production. They are saying कि ठीक है, we are the owners of, because households are the owners of factors of production. They own the factors of production. So households में कौन आते हैं? The consumers and the general public at large, right? So general public at large and the consumers own the factors of production. They will provide those to all the firms and organizations who say that we're going to be conducting economic activity. वो कहते हैं ये ले factors of production. और उसके against firms उनको क्या देते हैं? उसके against they provide them with factor incomes. Right? So they're providing factor incomes against the factors of production that households are providing. Now, what is factor income? That is the income that is given by the firms to the households on the factors of production. And what are those factor incomes? Land ka factor income है, rent, capital ka interest, labor ka wages, enterprise ka profits. We've already seen and studied that before in AS as well. The factor rewards jo hote na, or you can say factor incomes are basically rewards on the factors of production given by the firms to the households because they provided factors of production to the firms. अब households के पास जो ये पैसे आ गए हैं, ये जो factor rewards आ गए हैं, ये जो factor incomes आ गई हैं, what will they do with that income? They are going to buy the goods and services that firms will produce. Because the factors of production दिए गए थे households ने firms को, उसका purpose यही था to produce factors of production. And once those factors of production are produced by the firms, households will end up buying those, right? So firms will basically firms will basically produce the goods and services and they will provide them to the households, and households will obviously in return spend those factor incomes on the firms. तो जितनी भी factor income household ने generate की होगी वो सारी की सारी use हो जाएगी in providing in buying the goods and services that are produced. देखो यहाँ पे दो assumptions हम ले रहे हैं. हमारी सबसे पहली assumption तो ये है कि जितने भी फैक्टर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन हाउसहोल्ड ने प्रोवाइड किए हैं फर्म्स को, तो फर्म्स उससे गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज जो बना रहे हैं वो सारे के सारे गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज हाउसहोल्ड्स खरीद लेंगे और वो हाउसहोल्ड्स को ही बेचेंगे. और दूसरी अजम्पशन ये है कि जितनी भी फैक्टर इनकम बेसिकली जनरेट हुई है वो सारी हाउस होल्ड्स को जो गई है बेसिकली, वो सारी की सारी वापस से यूज हो जाएगी in buying the goods and services to the firms. So basically what we are saying is कि हो ये रहा है, बेसिकली हो ये रहा है कि अगर आप देखें हाउस होल्ड ने फैक्टर ऑफ प्रोडक्शन फर्म्स को दी है, फर्म्स ने सारी फैक्टर इनकम इनको दे दी। ये सारी फैक्टर इनकम जो है वो बेसिकली इस्तेमाल हो गई गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज खरीदने पे जो फर्म्स ने हाउस होल्ड को प्रोवाइड की है। सो क्या हो रहा है इसके अंदर, हमारे पास इनकम जो है वो मूव हो रही है फ्रॉम फ्रॉम हाउस होल्ड्स। So the income is moving from the firms to households and then households to the firms, from the firms and households and then households. So income is moving in a circular direction. It's a circular movement that is taking place. And within that circular movement, what is the resulting impact is that it creates GDP and it results into economic growth because income is moving from one of the relevant stakeholders to the other, from one economic agent to the other, from the households to the firms. So basically, and against that income, firms are producing goods and services and providing them to the households. And households are buying that good output and then giving the income to the firms, right? So income is moving in a circular direction. But there are two important assumptions that we are making. First of all the goods and services provided by the firms will be given to the household. The second assumption is that whatever the factor income that the households have earned, they're going to spend that entire income in buying the goods and services produced by the firms, right? So, but and later on we will challenge that assumption. हम इस assumption को challenge भी करेंगे by the way आगे जाके. So I've also written that down. I've written everything that I've explained यहाँ पे. I've written that households are basically providing the four factors of production to the firms, and then firms then combine them and produce goods and services from those factors of production. And then as a reward to the households for providing those factors of production, households receive factor income from the firm. So households will get that factor income from the firms as a reward. And then what is going to happen is that basically once they earn that reward from the household, from the firm, sorry, what they will do is that they will spend that. They will spend that on the goods and services that firms have provided. Okay, does this make sense? So basically what's happening is that households will spend this income on the goods and services that is basically made by the firms. So iski wajah se what is actually happening is so the fourth point would be that households spend this income on the goods and services that is made by the firm, right? So what do we conclude? What do we conclude from this? The fourth point would be that households basically spend this income on goods and services made by firms, right? Understood? So what are we actually concluding? What is happening here? That is very important. What is happening here is that we can see, you can say that hence we can see, how income flows. How is income actually flowing within the economy from firms to households and from households to firms within the economy. From firms to households, households to firm. From firms to households, households to firm. Right? How the income is flowing within the economy. And you can say that, it is basically showing the movement of spending and incomes throughout the economy. Because what is happening is that when the firms are buying the factors of production from households, they're actually rewarding them as factor incomes. So this is an expenditure that is given. So basically, when firms buy those factors of production, they are spending money as factor rewards although they are rewards for the households. ये जो फैक्टर रिवॉर्ड है, फैक्टर रिवॉर्ड, ये रिवॉर्ड हाउसहोल्ड्स के लिए, फर्म्स के लिए तो ये एक्सपेंसेस है, फर्म्स के लिए तो स्पेंडिंग है, राइट? तो ये जो रिवॉर्ड हाउसहोल्ड के पास आएगा, इसी रिवॉर्ड को दोबारा स्पेंड करेगी फर्म्स के गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज खरीदने पे। तो एक तरफ से एक्सपेंडिचर ही तो हो रहा है अगर देखा जाए। सो फर्म्स एंड हाउसहोल्ड्स बोथ आर स्पेंडिंग मनी इन द इकोनॉमी, राइट? So it shows that is why I've written, it shows the movement of spending and the generation of income throughout the economy. that income is spent back, and that generates further income in the economy. And what is actually happening, it is showing that, there's another way of saying it as well. It shows, how your income is basically flowing, how your income flows, um, within the economy, exchanging hands between households and and firms. How income is flowing within the economy in a circular motion, exchanging the hands between households and income, and that is resulting into economic activity taking place. That results into GDP being, that results into generation of GDP and the generation of national incomes. But we need to understand that the two assumptions we have made, because हमने assumption क्या की थी? What was our assumption here? Our assumption was that, because this is a very simplistic model that we have created about how incomes are generated in the economy and how GDP is generated. It's a very simplistic model because we have assumed that assumption was that all the factor income that was earned by households will be spent back on the economy. Now, this assumption, we will challenge it in a few minutes. So basically, it is showing that how income is being generated. It is showing that how income exchanges hands, how income is generated, how GDP is generated. It is showing the movement of spending and income within the economy. So there are four ways of saying it. What circular flow tells us, right? Uh, moving forward, we are going to challenge this assumption now because we need to understand that we assumed that all the factor income that was earned by the household will be spent back on the economy. Now, this is an assumption that we made. But do you really think that households जो भी factor income कमाएंगे, वो सारी की सारी they're going to be spending it back on the economy? Do you really think that this will happen? It will not happen like that, guys, because you need to also understand that a lot of our incomes that households will earn, they will end up saving that income, right? Maybe they deposit some of the income in the banks and earn interest on it. So if I receive 100 rupees as rent or $100 as rent, I'm not going to spend the entire $100 in buying goods and services from firms. I might end up saving it as well. Maybe if I earn $100 as income, some of that income would be taxed as well. Maybe if I get $100 as income, right? Against that income, maybe I spend some of that income. So against $100, I spend $60 in buying goods and services domestically, right? And on the other hand, I spend $40 on imports. M is for imports, right? So, so, so again, not all income is spent domestically. What we are saying is, what the narrative that we're trying to establish is that not all income would be spent on buying goods and services that are produced domestically. तो हमारी assumption ये है कि अगर $100 earn किए हैं households ने, तो ये $100 वापस पाकिस्तानी इकोनॉमी के अंदर सर्कुलेट होते रहेंगे. This is a wrong assumption. Why? Because this will not happen all the time. Not all the money would be circulated or recirculated back in the economy. Why? Because some of it would be maybe saved, some of it would be taxed, some of it would be spent on imports. तो सर ये जो आपने बातें लिखी है ना, ये आपने लिखा सेविंग को हम बोलते हैं एस. आज से जब भी मैं एस लिखूंगा समझ जाना इट स्टैंड फॉर सेविंग. जब भी मैं टी लिखूंगा समझ जाना इट स्टैंड फॉर टैक्सेशन. जब भी मैं एम लिखूंगा समझ जाना इट स्टैंड फॉर इम्पोर्ट्स. दीज आर द alphabets that denote saving, taxation and imports. S plus T plus M, इन तीनों को मिला के हम बोलते हैं leakages and withdrawals. Leakages from the circular flow, withdrawals from the circular. Withdraw हो रही है income. Income is being leaked out of the circular flow and sent, the economy is moving out of the income is moving out of the economy. It is not recirculated back. It is not injected back. It's just moving out of the economy. So that is why it's known as a leakage or a withdrawal from the circular flow of income, right? It shows that, in these ways. In what ways? In these ways. What are these ways, Abira? Saving, taxes, imports. in these ways in which incomes earned, whatever you earn, whatever the household earned that factor rewards in the economy may leak out of the circular flow of income. It may go back, not go back, sorry, it's not the right word. It may actually end up getting out of the economy. It's leaking from the economy. This money is leaking. This money could have been circulated back in the economy. And if it would have been circulated back in the economy, it would have created further GDP and further national incomes. Further national output would have actually increased. But it's sent back. It's not sent back, it's leaked out of the economy. It's leaked out. It's a withdrawal. एंड अभी मैंने 3 वर्ड्स बोले, नेशनल इनकम, नेशनल एक्सपेंडिचर, नेशनल आउटपुट. आप बोल रहे होंगे सर आप कह रहे हैं नेशनल इनकम बढ़ जाएगी, फिर आप कह रहे हैं नेशनल आउटपुट भी बढ़ जाएगा, तो मतलब क्या लिख कर आए एग्जाम में? क्या हम ये लिखें कि नेशनल इनकम बढ़ जाएगी, या हम ये लिखें कि नेशनल आउटपुट बढ़ जाएगा? व्हाट आर यू ट्राइंग टू से? जस्ट टेल अस वन थिंग, बिकॉज वी कांट understand 3-4 things. So make it easy for us. Now I'm going to tell you why am I using these 3 words. I'm using these 3 words because they both mean the same thing. First of all, national income is national output, is national expenditure. You need to understand that, first of all, GDP is your national output. It shows the amount of money that you have. It shows the value of goods and services earned. So what is GDP? GDP is basically your value of goods and services in the economy. Value of the goods is not output. You don't measure GDP as 100 units. You measure GDP as, let's say, $100. Remember that. GDP is not measured in units. Now, that value of GDP, this value of GDP is equal to the amount of income that is earned in the economy, and the amount of income that is earned in the economy is equal to the amount of expenditure that was made in the economy. What do I mean by that? What I'm going to say is, I've actually explained this through an example as well. You need to understand that, for example, if I go to a shop and I buy a chocolate, right? 1 unit of a chocolate, and that is actually worth $100. Now that is a GDP. Let's assume that nothing was produced else in the economy. Let's assume that in the Pakistan's economy, only 1 chocolate was produced, which was valued at $100. That's the value of the chocolate. So that is the GDP of the country then, assuming nothing else is made. So the national output is worth $100. Now you need to understand, if national output is $100, it means that this chocolate would obviously not be kept in the shop. It would be sold by someone. I mean, by the shop, the firm will sell it. And let's say if I buy it, then my expenditure is how much? My expenditure is $100. Let's assume that this is the only expenditure made in the economy. So obviously that becomes a national expenditure itself then. So what is my expenditure? It's $100, because I spent money. I spent $100 for it. I spent $100 for buying a chocolate that was worth $100, and that $100 is an income for the shop. So, and assuming that there's only one shop trading, so that becomes a national income as well. So the national income would also be $100. That is why we establish the equation or the narrative that national output is always equal to national income, and this national income is always equal to national expenditures, right? So national output is equal to national income, and national income is always equal to national expenditure. So ये हमने बात की कि देखें, ये जो आपकी assumption है ना, that you're saying that a circular flow of income is showing the movement of income within the economy, that is right. We're not challenging that. Circular flow of income is showing the circular movement of national income in the economy, and it is showing us how much GDP or economic growth the economy has actually made, right? And we can also measure that GDP or economic growth as well. I'll tell you how. But we are not challenging that, but we are saying that not all income is spent back. Not all income that was earned by the household is actually spent back. Okay. दूसरी assumption हमारी, second assumption that we were also making was that ये जो expenditure है, this expenditure that was done by the households in buying the goods and services from the firms, you can call it consumer expenditure, right? Because it means that a lot of consumer spending was done, because this is consumer expenditure, because households end up buying goods and services from the firms is consumer expenditure. So not all expenditure is consumer expenditure. The second assumption, but that was the assumption that we made when we were drawing the initial simplistic uh, flow of national income. We said that all the expenditures by the household will be spent back on the economy, but that's not the case. You're saying that aisa nahi hota. Because the assumption that the only expenditure will take place in the economy will be by households or consumers on goods and services. But that's not the case. It doesn't happen like that. What are the other expenditures that are taking place in the economy? Are households the only people and are consumers the only people spending money on the firm on the goods and services produced by the firms? No. Expenditure is done in the form of investments as well, right? By the firms in the form of investment. Spending is basically done by the firms as well in the form of investment. Can you please define what investment means? Spending on capital goods. So what is investment? Investment is spending money on capital goods like equipment, machinery, and investment also stands for, maybe expanding factories, buying more raw material. Anyways, is the spending only done by firms? No, the spending is also done by the government in the form of government spending. We know that government also spends money, right? Government spends money on the economy through its expenditures, like on infrastructure, public goods, merit goods, uh, your in education, healthcare. Sahi hai ji? Then you also have investment that is done you also have spending that is done by overseas firms and overseas residents, right, in the form of exports. So they also buy our domestic goods, right? And it represents, so overseas firms just spending karte hain, that represents foreign demand for domestic goods. It represents foreign demand for domestic goods. So whatever was produced in the economy, some of it might be exported. So that is also spending that is done by foreigners, by maybe overseas residents, that is by people overseas, by households overseas, by consumers overseas, and firms overseas as well, right? And they will buy our domestic goods, right? So which is known as exports. So that is also spending that is done in the economy. Investment, government expenditures, and exports together are known as injections. They are known as injections because it represents money being injected into the circular flow outside of households and what I'm saying is that circular flow mein you have households and then you have firms and then they are conducting economic activity and generating incomes for the economy. But they are not the only people who are responsible for generating GDP. You have you have you have let's यहाँ पे आ जाते हैं. So if you look at this diagram, you have investment taking place, you have government spending taking place, you have exports taking place. These are known as injections. And these injections increase your GDP. It represents money being injected outside of households and firms. They increase your GDP. And like I said, we were assuming that whatever was the factor reward was actually going to the households, and households were using all those factor incomes and buying the goods and services from the firms. But this was an absurd assumption because this will not happen. Why? Because what will happen? Some of the income that was earned by the households will be saved, right? So income will be saved, income will be taxed, and some of the income will be spent on imports, and this is known as leakages. And this will reduce your GDP. This will reduce your national incomes. So taxes, savings, and your this imports will reduce your GDP and reduce your national income. But what I'm saying is कि यहाँ पे आप देखें कि पैसे बाहर से आ रहे हैं. Injection है ना. There is a movement inside the circular flow, into the circular flow. और यहाँ पे आप देखें the money is going outside of the circular flow. So that is why it's basically known as a leakage and a withdrawal. So injection is basically ways in which money enters the economy outside of consumer spending, like outside of your of consumer spending, because consumer spending, apart from consumer spending, there are other ways through which क्या कहते हैं ये तुम्हारी injections take place, such as investment, government spending, and exports, because these are also the factors that contribute to spending. and this spending generates income, and this income generates GDP. And if you remember the equation of aggregate demand, AD is equals to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So this circular flow is again a representation of aggregate demand. It is a representation of how aggregate demand generates national income in the economy. So we are saying that in the simplistic model, consumer expenditure is responsible for generating demand. But then we are saying that apart from consumer spending, we have injections as well, such as investment, government spending, and exports taking place. So what we are trying to say is that aggregate demand is representing the demand in the domestic economy. Because what is AD? AD is spending. ठीक है ना, आप मेरी YouTube पे वीडियो है इसकी एग्रीगेट डिमांड की, एक सिंपल वाली वीडियो, वो जाके देख लीजिएगा, थोड़ा और क्लियर हो जाएगा आपको. So AD is basically spending. ठीक है, expenditure is taking place, spending by consumers, investment, government, and pure net exports. So what you are saying is that spending is done by consumers, but apart from that, there would be injections, and these injections are outside of the economic agents, that is your households and firms, such as investments by firms, government spending, and export. And this is autonomous injections taking place inside the circular flow that actually increases your GDP, increases your national income, increases your national output. So एक जो आपने establish किया है कि national income equals to national output equals to national expenditure, इसकी logic तो मैं आपको समझा चुका हूँ, तो ये समझ आ गई होगी आपको. एक चीज आपको ध्यान में रखनी बहुत जरूरी है, and that is कि if you look at the conclusions that are drawn from this, तो conclusion drawn क्या है? Conclusions drawn ये है कि like I said, national income क्या कर रहा है? National income आपकी economic growth को measure कर रहा है. ठीक है, अगर injections जो है वो greater than leakages हैं, यानी कि if your injections are greater than leakages, that is the amount of money that is injected outside of the circular flow exceeds the amount of money that flows outside from the circular flow. What did I say? It means that the amount of money that comes in the circular flow from outside exceeds the amount of money that goes outside of circular flow from inside the circular flow. Then obviously it is going to increase your economic growth, considering that injections exceed leakages. Economic growth बढ़ेगी, GDP बढ़ेगी, national output बढ़ेगा, national income बढ़ेगी, और obviously इसका impact फिर दूसरे macroeconomic indicators और objectives पे भी आएगा, such as employment भी बढ़ जाएगी, tax revenues भी बढ़ जाएंगे, living standards भी बढ़ेंगे. So more money coming into the economy than leaving it, and it's the other way around. If injections exceed if your leakages exceed your injections, if injections are less than leakages, it means that more money going out than coming in. The economic growth will fall, GDP will fall, national income will fall. By the way, what will be happening to aggregate demand over here? If I ask you this question, what is basically happening to aggregate demand at this point? Aggregate demand will rise because GDP rise, so definitely aggregate demand rise over here. And 0.2 injections less than leakages, aggregate demand over here will fall. Simple answer. If injections equal the withdrawals, ये बड़ी important चीज है, इसको लिख लें. अगर injections withdrawal के बराबर है तो आपका economy, there's a macroeconomic equilibrium. Again, this is all connected to the macroeconomic equilibrium, which we have already studied before as well. But then, yeah, अभी उसको हम explain नहीं कर रहे, वो आगे जाके आएगा. But then remember that if injections exceed withdrawals, ये हम national income में देखेंगे how your economy achieves national equilibrium level of national income. So you will basically achieve an equilibrium level of national income. There would be an equilibrium of national income if your injections are exactly equal to withdrawals. So basically your economic growth is neither increasing nor falling, right?